everyone, and welcome back to another Brush and Bubbles tutorial. Today we're going to be painting a cute little chick. As always, I'm going to talk you through exactly how you can create this at home. I'll be showing you step by step so you can simply follow along with the instructions. But like always, please feel free to change up your painting. You can do different colours, you can change up the shape of your chick or the shell, you can do a different background colour, a different colour for your egg. You might even want to go really abstract and wild and paint a multicoloured chick. It's totally up to you. So before we get going, I'm going to talk you through what I've got in front of me and what you might need to create this at home. I'm going to be using acrylic paints today, and I'm painting on a stretched 8 by 10 size canvas. You can use any size canvas that you like. You might even want to use a piece of paper or some card. You don't always have to use a canvas if you don't want to. I have a few different size brushes here on the side, just on standby in case I want to use them. So I'd recommend having a few different sizes as well. I've got a bigger square shaped brush, a smaller square shaped brush, medium pointy end brush, and then a teeny tiny brush just for any details. I've got some kitchen towel here. This is just for dabbing our brush on once we've washed them with the water, and also getting rid of any excess paint. We can just dab it on this kitchen towel. I have a glass of clean water. And then over here in my paint palette, I've got the paints that I want to use for this painting. So I've given myself 2 blobs of white paint just because I'm going to be mixing up quite a lot of white into my other colours. I then have some yellow, red, blue and green. So I'm going to be using the yellow and the red to do the chick, and then I'm going to be doing a sort of light blue colour for my background, so I'll be mixing this blue in with some white. And then for the shell of my egg, I'm going to go for a duck egg colour, which is a little bit like a turquoise shade, but it's very, very pastel in colour. So I'm going to be using quite a lot of white, a little bit of my blue, a little bit of my green, and mixing that up until I'm happy with the shade. Like I mentioned, you can use any colours that you want, so I would just pop in all of the colours that you want to use for your own painting, just making sure you've got quite a lot of white to mix in. And if you're using acrylic paint today and you haven't got enough space on your palette, or if you don't own a palette like this, you can always just use a ceramic plate from the kitchen. They wash up nicely with some soapy warm water. We're going to start by mixing up one of our first colours, and with this first colour we're just going to use it to draw in the shape of our eggshell. So I'm just going to keep the eggshell to the lower half of my canvas, and I'm just going to have zigzaggy jagged edges along the top, and this is where our chick's going to be jumping out from. I'll then be painting that whole thing in with that shell colour. We'll then go in and mix up a different colour, and then we'll draw in the outline for our chick. So have a little think at this point what colour you want to do your eggshell, because that's the colour we're going to mix up first. So I'm going to pick up one of my slightly bigger brushes. I've got this square shaped brush here. And before we start, I'm just going to dip the brush into the water just to loosen up those bristles, giving it a tap on the base of the cup. You can even dab it on the side of the cup or use your kitchen towel. Now, mixing up colours is the fun bit because you don't have to follow along with me. You can really experiment with your own colours. So I'm going to start by picking up a few scoops of my white paint and I'm just moving it over to a separate area of my palette. We just want to make sure we're mixing up plenty of this colour so we don't have to mix up more later. Once I've got the white in there, I'm just going to use the corner of this brush and I'm picking up a little bit of my blue, adding it on top of that white. And then I'm going to do the same thing, just using the corner of my brush, picking up a little bit of my green and adding that next to the blue. I'm just going to mix it up with that white paint and see what colour occurs. So by mixing up this blue and the green, we should get quite a nice pastel turquoise colour. Once you're happy with your colour, what we're going to do is just add a little bit of water to this. The reason why I like to add water, so I'm just dipping my paintbrush in the water and just adding a few drops into that colour, and then I'm going to carefully mix it in. The reason why we like to add it is because we're using acrylic paint. Acrylic paint is a lovely versatile paint to use when we're creating our paintings. But if it's a hot day or if you're in a warm room, the paint can dry quite quickly, so the water just helps keep it nice and fresh and fluid. And if you ever feel like your paint is getting a little bit dry, simply just pop a little bit more water into it and give it a good mix, and it should revive it nicely. I'd always just recommend making sure you're really mixing in that water in with the paint. So now that I'm happy and I've prepared my paint, I'm just going to scrape off this brush. I'm just going to pop it down on my kitchen towel. I'm now going to pick up one of my smaller brushes. I'm just going to use this paint and this smaller pointy brush to draw in the shape of the eggshell. So I just want the eggshell curving around just at the base, just here of my canvas, and then I'm going to have the sort of the chick's head popping out from the top. So I want to do this in a curved line, almost like it's the top of a bowl. So it's not going straight across, it needs to have a little bit of a curve. So I'm just going to do it nice and slowly, starting on the left-hand side of my canvas and making sure I'm not doing it too far up, because we want to make sure we've got enough room for our chick. So have a little look at the piece of paper or canvas or whatever you're using to paint on. Just make sure you're allowing enough space at that top bit. So I'm going to start my eggshell from about here. I'm just going to dip it down and I'm just going to do sort of zigzaggy shapes. We don't want them to be neat, they don't need to be straight. Some might zigzag down a little bit more. And then I'm just going to dip it down slightly more when it gets to this middle bit, just so it looks like the eggshell is curved a little bit. And then when I get to this side, I'm going to bring it back up so it sort of is the same size on the other side. It's just going up a little bit higher up here as we meet the edge of our canvas. If you want to, if you are using a canvas, you can always paint the sides as you go along as well. Take your time with this, there's absolutely no rush. You can always pause the video as and when you need to. The great thing about these zigzags is once we go and fill in all of this area down here with this colour that we've created, you can always change the shape and how many of these zigzags that you've got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my smaller pointy brush down. I'm going to go back to my slightly bigger brush just because I can fill up a little bit more space with this. And I'm just going to pick up some of this colour. And this is the fun bit. We're just going to paint the bottom part of our canvas, just bringing this paint colour all the way up to meet these zigzags, just being nice and careful that you don't go over them when you meet them. If you want to be nice and neat, you can kind of be very blended with your brush strokes and really work that paint into the canvas. Or if you want to be a little bit more abstract and you want to apply the paint in a bit more of a thick way, you can be a bit more blobby with it, and you can be a bit more like this. It's up to you, whatever you feel like doing today. All we're doing is just filling in this bottom part of our painting. once you've painted this in, if you want to do another layer of paint, just so it's really, really thick, you can always just wait for this area to dry, and then once it's dried, you can just go over with another layer of paint. This is also your moment, if you finish filling this area in, to decide if you want to add any more zigzags to the top. And if you do, I would just recommend picking up your smaller brush, and you can always add a few little extras. You might want a few smaller zigzags where the shell's broken. You can just add those in now, using the same colour paint wherever you want. Sometimes I think it's taking a little step back and then deciding, because you might not always need it, or you might not always want it. And don't worry if your zigzags aren't neat or straight. This is literally where the chick has hatched out of the egg, so it's never going to break equally. We want it to look nice and zigzagged and jagged, so the more zigzag and jagged, the better. Once you're happy with how that's looking, you can then just go ahead and give your brushes a good wash in the water. Now that my first layer is dry, I'm just going to take my medium brush and I'm just going to do another layer of paint, just because I want it to be really, really thick with the paint here. But you don't have to do this. If you're happy with how yours is looking, you can just skip forward to the next bit. I'm just going to give my brush another good wash in the water. We're going to move on now to creating the colour for our chick. So if, like me, you're going to go for a light yellow shade, you can just follow along with what I'm doing. But if you are going to go crazy and do a different colour for your chick, this is your chance to mix up that colour. So I'm just picking up my medium clean brush again, and I'm just going to scoop up some of my white paint, and I'm moving it to a different area on my palette. And then to this white, I'm just going to gradually start adding a little bit of yellow. I'm going to mix it up until I'm happy with the colour for my chick. Again, we want to make sure we're mixing up enough paint here, because we're going to be using this to draw the outline. Then we're also going to be using it to fill in our chick as well. If you wanted to go for a slightly more orange tone with your chick, all you want to do is add a tiny little bit, just a small amount of red to this colour here, and that will give you a nice orange. I'm just scooping up a little bit more of my white, a little bit more of my yellow, mixing it in until I'm happy with the colour and that I have enough. When you are happy, we're just going to drop a little bit of water into this mixture. If your water is looking very dark, you can always change it, giving it a freshen up. Mine's not too dark, so it's okay. I'm just adding a little bit of those droplets in there, giving it a really, really good mix in with that paint, just to keep it nice and fluid. Now I'm going to swap back over to my smaller pointy brush. I'm just popping this paintbrush down and picking up my pointy brush. Now we're going to create the shape for our chick. So this is the fun bit, because we can have a lot of fun with the shape and the expression of our chick as well. But we're just going to do sort of an upside down bowl shape here, just coming out from the top part of our shell. But we want to leave a little bit of space where we're going to have the chick's wings kind of coming out from either side of the canvas. So I'm just going to pick up some of my yellow, and we can always start slightly smaller because we can make it a bit bigger. We're going to be filling it in with this colour anyway. So I'm just going to start from the base, and I'm going to carefully do an upside down bowl shape here. Just making sure that it's not going over these lines. So there we have our first shape. Now, what's nice about this is if you want to make it a bit bigger or a little bit taller at the top, we can just slowly start adding a couple of extra layers just along the side. If you want to make it a bit bigger, I might just bring mine up slightly higher. Because we're going to be filling all of this bit in here with this yellow colour. And then once you've sort of got that shape in, we can then start drawing in the wings. So the wings just kind of come out from the side. So I'm just going to have this wing just coming out here at an angle. It's going to go over the edge of the canvas, and just here, I'm going to do a little line, and then it's going to have a curve on it. And then again, another little curve, just until we get to the top part where it meets sort of the edge of the canvas. So I'll do that again over here. So we're just starting with the line going out the top. We're finding the one at the bottom. These are almost like curved fingers. Next one's a bit bigger, bit bigger, bit bigger to meet the top. What we can now do, we can go back to our big brush and just fill in all of this area. And once we've filled it in, we can have a little look at the wings. We can change up the shape slightly if we need to. But we're just going to focus on filling in our chick with our colour of choice. So for me, it's this light yellow. And I've just switched over to my medium brush to do this. We want to be nice and careful. Wherever we're bringing this colour down to meet our eggshell, we want to make sure that the eggshell paint isn't still really, really wet. Because if it's really, really wet, it's just going to blend in with this colour. So what I personally like to do is leave a little gap, just for now, just between the colour of our chick and the colour of our eggshell. So I'm just bringing this paint colour down almost to meet it, but I'm not touching it just yet because I don't want it to touch, because this down here is still a little bit wet where I've got that turquoise colour. So instead I'm just focusing it, this yellow on this section here. And then when you get to your wings, you might just want to swap back to a smaller brush, completely up to you. And we're just going to fill them in. So I've got this first bit up here, which kind of comes off the edge of the canvas. And then the next bit with the curved edge comes down a little bit. And they kind of get shorter and shorter. So we get down to the last one. And I'm going to do the same on this side as well. Filling in the one that goes off the edge of the canvas. And then filling in the others as they go down. just look like two very small little wings. Chicks don't have big wings. They just have tiny little wings to start with. And then while you're using your smaller brush, you can always pick up some more paint. And if you feel like your shell is a bit drier now, you can just use your smaller brush just so you've got a bit more control, just to fill in that area, just bringing the colour of the chick down to meet the eggshell, just nice and carefully. And if you want to, you can always hold your wrist and then rest your other hand down, just so you have a little bit more control if you want to be really careful. Wouldn't worry too much about this. If you need to, once the chick paint is dry, so once the yellow bit is dry, you can then always go back to your shell colour, and you can just go over it slightly if you need to. Just doing a little dance between the paints, just doing the different layers. And remember, there's no rush with this. Take your time, nice and slowly. I'm only using a tiny little bit of paint on my brush to do this, just so I can control it a little bit more. When you're ready, we're now just going to add a little tuft of hair at the top of our chick's head. So I'm just going to use this small brush, and I'm just going to do a little sort of spike, almost like a lopsided spike, a bit like a triangle, coming down from the top part of its head towards the left-hand side. So it's a little spike like this. And then I might do another one, a bit bigger, at the top. This is just going to act as like a little tuft of hair at the top of our chick. Again, if you want to, you can always wait for this yellow paint to dry, and then you can go back over it with another coat as well. When you're ready, you can just give your brushes a really good wash in the water. Just make sure all of that paint is off them. And if you want to give your water a top up or a refresh, you can just change your water now. So while we wait for our chick to dry, we can just move on to creating the colour that we're going to be using for our background. So again, this is totally up to you what colour you want to do. I'm going to go for a light blue, so I'm just going to mix up that shade now. So taking my medium brush again that I've just cleaned, I'm going to scoop up 2 or 3 scoops of my white. Just making sure I've got enough to cover in that background. And then to this white, I'm going to start adding a little bit of blue. You can just add a little bit of it at a time if you want, give it a mix and see what colour you come up with. I'm looking for a nice light sky blue colour. If you wanted to do pink, you could always mix up some white and some red together. If you want to make a different shade of green, you can always try mixing some yellow and some blue together, because yellow and blue mixed together makes green. And then if you add a bit of white to it, it goes into a lighter shade of green. So you can really have a play around with your colours here. I'm just adding a bit more blue to this just to darken it up slightly. And remember, if you've mixed up a colour and you don't like it, you don't have to use it. You can always test it out on a scrap piece of paper, see what you think. If you don't like it, just go back to the palette and mix up another shade. So I think I'm quite happy with that colour. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start carefully adding this to the background. So like we just did with the chick, I'm going to be really careful because this paint is still wet. So I'm just going to focus this blue just in the areas where I haven't already got wet paint. And again, if you want to go a little bit smoother, backwards and forwards, brush stroke with your paint, you can. If you want to be a bit messier and a bit choppier, you can be a bit more abstract with your application, and you might like to see the swoops that the paintbrush makes with the paint. It's really, really up to you how you want to apply that paint to your canvas. You might feel like you want to be a little bit more choppy and rough with your application, or you might feel like you want to be a little bit more smooth and calm. You can always try both, see which one you're preferring today. And I'm just painting this in, but I'm leaving little gaps when I get down to my chick. If you want to, you can always try using a different paintbrush. If you've got a bigger paintbrush and you've got a bigger area to cover, sometimes it's quite nice to try a few different paintbrushes, see which one you're feeling. Leaving that little gap we spoke about. And whenever you're ready, you can always pick up a smaller brush. I'm just going to wash this again. Pick up a smaller pointy brush whenever you're ready, and then some of this same colour. And then you can just use the smaller brush just to get into all of the little details, just as we're bringing this background colour up to meet our chick. Just means that we have a little bit more control where we're placing this paint. And remember, we can do a couple of different coats of that background colour as well, just to make sure it's nice and thick. So if you want, this can just be the first coat, and then we can go back and add more. So don't worry if you can still see some of the canvas through it. Where I get to the wings, I'm just making sure I'm keeping that curved shape as I paint in my background. I'm also being very careful as I get up to where the shell is as well. Remember, we can always go back to some of our other colours if we need to. And don't worry if your edge of your chick looks a bit jagged and not neat. We don't need it to look neat because we're painting a chick which is covered in fluff and feathers, so we want it to look quite natural. So don't worry too much if you don't feel like you're being super perfect with how you're bringing your paint down to meet your chick and how you've painted the whole painting, in fact, because we're painting nature. So anything with nature, nothing ever looks perfect. There's no such thing. Everything has its own unique look and feel, and each chick is completely different. You could paint the same painting over and over again using different colours, different shaped chicks, different shaped shells, and it will come out differently each time, which is what's so fun about art. Sometimes when you think you've made a big mistake, it's actually not a mistake. Sometimes it actually turns out better than you originally planned. So sometimes you have to just go with it, adapt, see what happens. Once the rest of your background starts to dry, if you want to do another coat of this paint, you can always start to do that now. And if your paint is still wet, I'd recommend just leaving it another 5 minutes, or if you have got a hairdryer handy, you can always use a hairdryer just on a light setting, so not too hot, maybe like a medium setting. And you can just give it a gentle dry, and that will just help speed up the paint drying process. If you add wet paint on top of wet paint, it tends to almost pull it off a bit like an eraser rather than adding a second coat. So you do just want to make sure that your background is nice and dry before you apply your next coat of paint. Once you've touched up any of the background areas of your painting, we're just going to leave it to dry for about 5 minutes before we then go in and add all of our details. So I would just give your brushes a good wash, and you can change your water as well. We're going to move on now to creating a orange colour that we're going to be using for the beak. So I've just picked up a square medium brush, which is nice and clean, and I'm just going to move back over to my paint palette. So I'm just going to start by picking up a little bit of my white, and I'm just going to move it over to a different area of the dish. And then I'm going to pick up a small amount of yellow, just a tiny dab on the end of my brush. I'm going to add that to the white, and I'm going to do the same, small dab of red, and add that and give it a mix. Now this should give us quite a nice orangey tone. If you feel like you need to change it up, if it's looking a little bit too pink, you can always add a little bit more yellow to it as well. We just want a different colour and a different tone to the shade that we've already got for our chick. So if you've gone for this kind of tone for your chick, you might want to do a light yellow beak or a black beak, completely up to you. I'm just going to mix up a little bit more, so adding a little bit more of my white, my yellow, my red, just mixing up plenty of paint. Again, I'm just going to add a tiny drop of water to this and mix it in just to keep the paint nice and fresh and fluid. And then when we go to painting it, I'm just going to do this with one of my smaller brushes. So I'm just scraping off the excess on the side of this brush. I'm now picking up a tinier small brush. Now I'm just going to show you on my palette first what we're going to be doing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do 2 triangles on top of each other. So I'm going to start by just doing a line like this. And the first triangle is going to go up. And then the other triangle is going to go down, just like that. And essentially that is the shape for our beak. And then we're just going to fill it in. Nice and simple. We're then going to be adding 2 little black eyes on either side, just like so. And that will be the little face of our chick. So taking your colour of choice that you've just mixed up and your small paintbrush, what I'd recommend doing is when you load up the paintbrush, you can see here it's got quite a lot of paint on the end. What you can do to help yourself is just dash off any of that excess paint on the side of your palette, and then it just brings it to a nice point, just so you haven't got too much paint on there. You can also twist the handle of your brush and drag the bristles along, making a little snail trail, and this also just makes that point of the brush really nice and pointy. So it just gives you a little bit more control. So you can have a practice with this as well if you want, just before you go onto your painting. So when you're ready to paint onto your chick, we're just going to work out, just by using our hands, where we want the chick's beak to go and where we want the eyes to go. So we don't want it too high up and we don't want it too far down. So I'm going to put it around here. I'm just going to start by roughly finding the middle. I'm just going to do a little line going across. Just pushing down very, very gently. So there's my first little line. And now from this line, I can do my triangle going up. Like this. And then we can do our triangle going down. Again, don't worry if this line or if your beak isn't straight or neat. It can be nice and wonky if you want it to be. It gives the chick character. Then all we're going to do once we're happy with that shape is you can just carefully fill it in with this same colour. Again, if you want to do a couple of coats of paint of this, you always can as well. You can then take a step back if you feel like you want to add anything else or make it a bit bigger. This is your chance to do so, but I'd always say stop what you're doing, have a look at something else for a minute, and then you can come back to it with fresh eyes. When you're happy with the beak, we can just give our brush a wash in the water. Just going to go ahead and add a little bit of black acrylic paint. We only need the tiniest bit, and this is just for the eyes. And if you haven't got any black, don't worry, you can always use the same colour as your background if you want to, or you can use some blue or green or any colour that you want. So again, I'm just going to pick up my small brush and I'm going to add a little bit of water into this black and just really mix it in, just to make sure it's nice and fluid and it has a little bit more of an inky consistency. And all we're going to do with this is our 2 eyes that we did here, we're just going to do them little black circles for our eyes. So whenever you're ready, you can move over to your canvas and we can just decide where we want the eyes to go. So again, we don't want them too low, we don't want them too high. I would sort of place them around where the top sort of section of the beak is on either side, not too far apart, again, not too close, sort of in the middle. If you want, you can always do a little dot where you want them to go, and then you can make them bigger and bigger. As soon as you've got the dots in there, you might even like tying little dots for the eyes, But it's then up to you if you want to make them slightly bigger, and we're just going to do round circles and then fill in the circles. Again, I would always just recommend taking a little step back, and then you can decide if you want to make them bigger. As a last finishing touch, I'm just going to do a little line in the middle of the beak now that it's nice and dry, just with some red paint. So I'm just going to wash off my brush, get all of that black paint off. And then I'm going to go ahead and just pick up a little bit of my red paint. You can just make sure you're preparing your brush so you haven't got too much paint on the end. I'm just twizzling it around. And then I'm just going to do a little sort of curved line, just bringing each side of the beach together. Once you finish that final detail, if you want to sign your masterpiece, this is your moment. You can just take your smallest brush, and you might want to sign it kind of hidden in the shells, bottom right or left, or you might want to paint it along the side of your canvas if you want to as well. And there we have our chick hatching painting. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a little thumbs up and say a little hello in the comments below. We love hearing from you all. If you want to find us, we're at Brush and Bubbles on Instagram, and we're also on TikTok now. And if you have any requests for future paintings, then please feel free to message us and ask. We're always creating new paintings for you to get creative with at home. Thanks so much, everyone. See you next time.